They sold my company while I was lying in a hospital bed with tubes in my arm, and my son-in-law had the nerve to send me a get-well card the same afternoon the paperwork cleared. I remember staring at that card for a long time. There was a cartoon of a golden retriever on the front wearing a tiny nurse's hat. Inside, my daughter had written, "We're thinking of you, Dad. Rest up." My son-in-law had signed his name below hers, big, confident letters, the kind of signature a man writes when he believes he has just won something. He had, for about 11 days. I want to tell you what happened before I explain what happened after, because the before matters. The before is the part nobody tells you about. Everyone wants the revenge. Nobody wants to sit with the 43 years that made it necessary. My name is not important. What I did for 4 decades is, I built a commercial refrigeration supply company from a single warehouse in Akron, Ohio, into a regional distributor with contracts across 6 states and 42 employees who called me by my first name and meant it warmly. I started the business the year my daughter was born. I remember holding her in the hospital. She was red-faced and furious at the world, screaming at the fluorescent lights, and thinking that I now had a reason that was bigger than ambition. I went back to work 3 days later. My wife at the time, her mother, left when my daughter was 4. That was a different kind of loss, the kind that hollows you out quietly over years, not all at once. I raised my daughter mostly alone. I hired good babysitters, and I worked hard, and I told myself that the sacrifice was temporary, that once the company was stable, I would slow down and we would have time. Fathers tell themselves this. It is almost never true, and we almost never learn it until it is too late. Her name is Lydia. She grew up knowing that whatever she needed, I would provide. That is not a criticism. It is simply a fact, and facts have consequences. She married a man named Scott when she was 27. Scott sold commercial real estate and had the kind of easy confidence that I once mistook for competence. He wore good shoes. He shook hands firmly. He called me sir for the first 2 years and then stopped once the wedding was over. My son, my biological son from a brief second marriage that I will not spend much time on, is named Garrett. Garrett is 34. He manages, or managed, depending on which version of the timeline you are living in, a chain of fitness studios in Columbus that have been perpetually 6 months from profitability for the past 4 years. I gave Garrett the startup capital for those studios, $230,000 across 3 separate loans that were documented as loans, but that we both knew, in the honest part of ourselves, were gifts. I gave Scott and Lydia the down payment on their house in Westerville, $80,000. I paid for the wedding, which cost more than my first warehouse. I co-signed on the lease for Garrett's second location when his credit took a hit after the first location underperformed. I want to be honest with you about something. I was not a victim. Not entirely. I participated in building the world that eventually turned on me, and if I am going to tell this story right, I have to own that. My daughter learned that asking got results. My son learned that failure had no permanent consequences. I taught them both of those lessons, and I taught them well over decades without ever meaning to. The hospital stay that started all of this was for a cardiac event. Nothing catastrophic, a warning shot, the cardiologist called it. 62 years old, and my heart was sending me a memo I had been ignoring for years. I was in the Cleveland clinic for 9 days. My daughter came the first day and brought flowers. My son texted me a voice memo from Columbus because he said he could not get away from the studio. Scott, my son-in-law, did not come at all. He sent the golden retriever card. What they did while I was in that bed, I learned about from my attorney, a woman named Janet, who has handled my business affairs for 19 years, and who called me on day 6 with a voice so carefully measured that I knew before she finished her first sentence that something had gone badly wrong. My daughter and Scott had incorporated a new entity, Lydia called it a holding company, and had used a limited power of attorney document that I had signed 4 years earlier for a specific, narrow purpose to execute a sale of my company's majority interest to a private equity group out of Cincinnati. The document I had signed had been intended for a single real estate transaction involving one of our warehouses. Somehow, and Janet explained the legal architecture of this to me 3 times before I fully understood it, they had used it to facilitate a deal that valued my company at $6.4 million and transferred control to outside buyers while I lay in a hospital bed, watching cable news and eating institutional oatmeal. Scott had negotiated the deal. He had been in contact with the PE group for 8 months. Garrett knew. Not all of it, but enough. He had been promised a management consulting contract with the new ownership as part of the arrangement. Lydia had signed documents. She had signed them, and then she had come to my hospital room, and she had sat beside my bed, and she had told me to rest. I kept Janet on the phone for a long time that day. I asked her to walk me through every document, every timestamp, every signature. When she was done, I was quiet for a while. "What are my options?" I asked. She told me, and then I told her what I wanted to do, and she was quiet for a while. Before I left the hospital, I made 3 phone calls that nobody knew about. The first was to a forensic accountant in Pittsburgh who had done work for a competitor of mine years ago, and who came highly recommended for situations involving what he called financial archaeology. The second was to a separate attorney, a litigator this time, not Janet, someone with no prior connection to my family or my business. The third call was to my older brother, a man named Warren who lives outside of Flagstaff, and who is the only person in my life I have trusted without reservation since our mother died in 2009. I did not call Lydia. I did not call Scott. I did not call Garrett. I sent my daughter a text that said, "Feeling better. Doctor says I can go home Thursday. Thanks for the flowers." She sent back a heart emoji. I went home Thursday. I acted normal. I want you to understand how important the acting normal part was, because everything that came after depended on it. I went back to the office the following Monday. I sat in meetings with the PE group's transition team and asked intelligent questions and made notes and gave every impression of a man who was processing a difficult situation and arriving at acceptance. Scott attended 2 of those meetings. He sat across the table from me and explained the new ownership structure using a laser pointer and a slide deck, and he called me by my first name each time he addressed me. And I nodded and I asked follow-up questions, and I did not let my face do anything I did not intend. What I was actually doing during those 3 weeks was building a document. My forensic accountant had found several things during his review. The power of attorney document I had signed had been materially altered from its original scope, not fabricated, but expanded through a supplemental addendum that I had never seen and certainly never signed. Janet had missed it initially because it had been filed as a routine amendment. My litigator reviewed everything and used the word fraud in a way that was not casual. She also used the word rescission, which is the legal term for unwinding a transaction that was obtained through deceptive means. She told me we had a strong case. She also told me that litigation would be long, expensive, ugly, and would end my relationship with my daughter permanently. She asked me how I wanted to proceed. I told her I wanted to do both things at once, pursue the legal remedy and do something else, something quieter. She asked what I meant. I told her I meant that I wanted the legal process to take its time, because legal processes always take their time. And while it took its time, I intended to make some changes to the architecture of my own financial life that should probably have been made years ago. Changes that had nothing to do with fraud or litigation, but that would significantly affect the circumstances of certain people who had made certain assumptions. She told me she was my attorney, not my financial advisor. I told her I understood that completely. The first thing I did was stop, not visibly, not dramatically. I simply stopped doing the things I had always done automatically. The automatic wire transfer I sent to Garrett's studio operating account every quarter, the one I called a consulting fee in our records but that we both knew was a subsidy. I let it expire without renewal. His studio had been operating on a 60-day float that depended on that transfer. I knew this because I had been reviewing his financials every quarter for 4 years, something he did not know I did. The second thing I involved my brother Warren. Warren is 71 and spent his career as a CPA before retiring to Arizona, and he understood immediately what I was describing when I called him from a payphone at a rest stop on I-77, because I had become, perhaps reasonably, slightly paranoid about my cell phone. Warren did not ask me if I was sure. He asked me what I needed. What I needed was for certain assets specifically, a commercial property in Canton that I owned outright, and a portfolio of municipal bonds that had been accumulating since the mid-90s, to be transferred into a trust structure that predated the PE acquisition and was therefore not subject to the same legal tangle. The trust had been established by my own father years before his death and had technically held these assets all along, though I had been managing them informally. Formalizing the structure, with Warren as trustee, and my name absent from the surface documents, was not fraud. My attorney confirmed this. It was estate planning. People do it every day. Garrett called me on a Tuesday in October when his operating account came up short for payroll. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching a pair of cardinals argue over the feeder. "Dad," he said, "I think there was a problem with the transfer." "What transfer?" I said. There was a pause. "The quarterly transfer, the consulting fee." "Oh," I said. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that. With everything going on with the company transition, my accountant has been asking me to consolidate and document all my outgoing payments more formally. The consulting arrangement never had a proper contract. I probably should have said something sooner. I'm sorry about that." Another pause. "Longer. How long until you can sort it out?" he said. "I'm not sure," I said. "These things take time. How are the studios doing?" He told me the studios were doing fine. He said it the way people say things that are not true, but that they have said enough times that they have started to believe them a little. I told him I hoped things worked out and to keep me posted. He called back 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Lydia called me on a Thursday evening in November. I was watching a documentary about migratory birds. She wanted to have dinner, she said. Just the two of us. She had something she wanted to talk about. We met at an Italian place near her house that I had been to dozens of times. She looked like her mother around the eyes when she was nervous, which she was. She ordered a glass of wine and touched the stem without drinking it for most of the meal. "Dad," she said, after we had talked about nothing for 20 minutes, "Scott says the transition with the new ownership has been complicated." "It has been," I said. "These things always are. He's worried about your position. Whether you'll have a real role going forward." "That's considerate of him," I said. She looked at me. "I have known my daughter her entire life. I know the exact shape of the look she gives when she is deciding how honest to be. The thing is," she said, "the deal was structured in a way that the proceeds went into a joint account that Scott set up for the transition period, and some of those funds have been allocated as part of the deal costs. And we were thinking that maybe we should talk about how to make sure you're taken care of going forward, because Scott has some ideas about." "Lydia," I said. She stopped. "I know what you did," I said. I said it the same way I had said what transfer to Garrett. Quietly, without any particular weight, the blood left her face. "I know about the addendum," I said. "I know about the 8 months of communication with the PE group. I know about the consulting contract they offered Garrett. I know about the joint account." I picked up my water glass. "I've known since day 6 of my hospital stay. My attorney has known since day 7. My litigator has known since day 19. She said. "Dad, I'm not angry," I said. "I want you to know that." I was for a while in the hospital. Then I stopped being angry, and I started being practical. "What does that mean?" "It means I've had 4 months to make decisions, and I've made them." I put down my water glass. "The litigation will take time. These things always do. In the meantime, I want you to know that the Canton property and the bond portfolio are in a trust that predates the acquisition and is not subject to the PE deal's scope. My brother is the trustee. That was finalized 6 weeks ago." She stared at me. "The house," I said. "I hold the note on the mortgage because I co-signed your original application and Scott refinanced without fully removing my liability. I've been in touch with the bank. That situation is going to need to be resolved." "You can't." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm describing the legal reality as it currently exists. What happens next is up to a number of parties, including a federal judge, eventually, if my attorney determines that the interstate nature of the transaction meets the threshold for." I paused. "You should talk to a lawyer, Lydia. A good one. Scott should too." She started to cry, not performatively. Real tears, the kind that come from the gut. I had seen her cry like that twice before. Once when her dog died and once when her first pregnancy did not go to term. Both times I had reached across whatever distance existed between us and put my hand on her arm. I did not do that this time. I sat with her tears and I did not look away from them, but I did not reach for her, because reaching had been my reflex for 62 years, and I was learning, late but learning, that reflex and wisdom are not the same thing. "Why?" she said. "Why didn't you just say something? When it happened. Because I needed to understand what had happened before I said anything, I said. And because I had a cardiac event and I was in a hospital bed and I needed to not have a second one. She wiped her face. Dad, Scott said it was the best thing for the company. He said you were going to retire anyway, and that the deal would give you liquidity and… Did he say that before or after he used a document I signed for a warehouse lease to transfer majority ownership of my company to a private equity group without my knowledge? She didn't answer. Lydia, I said, I love you. I have loved you since the moment I held you in that hospital in Akron and you screamed at the ceiling. I have made a lot of mistakes as your father. I worked too much. I gave you things instead of time. I did not teach you what I should have taught you about what money is and what it costs. Those are my failures and I own them. I set my napkin on the table, but I did not raise you to sign your name on a document that transferred your father's life's work while he lay in a hospital bed not knowing. I don't know who taught you that was acceptable. It wasn't me. The restaurant around us went on being a restaurant. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed at a table near the window. I paid the check. I always pay the check. Some habits are harder to break than others, and I am working on it. Scott called me the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times over the following 2 weeks. On the 4th call, I answered, because my litigator had advised me that a recorded conversation might be useful, and I had, by that point, acquired a small device for exactly that purpose. He wanted to discuss the situation, he said. He wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings. He said that the deal had been done with the best intentions, and that he hoped we could resolve things as a family. I told him that I appreciated him calling. I told him that my attorneys would be in touch. I told him that I hoped the coming months would be clarifying for everyone. Attorneys? He said. Harry, it doesn't have to go that way. Scott, I said. I'm 62 years old. I had a cardiac event in September. I have a lot of time to think. I've thought about this carefully. I want you to know that I don't hate you. I don't think hatred is a productive use of whatever time I have left. But I also want you to know that what happened is not something I'm willing to absorb quietly because absorbing things quietly is what people counted on me to do. He started to say something. I have another call, I said. Take care of yourself. I hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of my kitchen. The Cardinals were back at the feeder. The morning light came through the window above the sink at a low November angle that made everything look like the beginning of something. Garrett drove up from Columbus 3 weeks later. He stood on my porch in a jacket that was too thin for December in Akron, and he looked, for the first time in many years, like the boy he had been before the money got between us. He did not try to explain or justify. He had called ahead, and I had let him come, because I wanted to see whether the part of him I had once known was still there under the part I had been funding. He told me he had known about Scott's conversations with the PE group. He told me he had not known the full scope of what they planned to do. He told me he was sorry, and he said it simply, without the performance that usually accompanies the word when people feel they need something from you. I told him that I believed him, partly, and that the partly mattered. I told him the consulting contract the PE group had promised him would not be going forward, because the transaction was under legal review, and the PE group's attorneys had advised them to hold on discretionary arrangements. I told him this without satisfaction. I told him his studio situation was going to require real solutions that did not involve me, and that I thought he was capable of finding them, and that I thought he had been prevented from discovering that capability by 43 years of a father who kept stepping in. He sat on my porch steps for a while after that. I brought him a cup of coffee because it was cold and because some things I am not trying to unlearn. Before he left, he asked me what was going to happen. With the lawsuit, with the family, with everything. I told him I did not know exactly. I told him the legal process would take time and that some things would probably be resolved, and some things probably could not be. I told him that I did not want to be estranged from my children for whatever years I had left, but that I also could not go back to being what I had been, which was a source of money and a name on documents, and a man who mistook providing for loving. He nodded. He did not say anything for a moment. You should have told us no, he said, a long time ago. You should have told us no. Yes, I said. I should have. He drove back to Columbus. I watched the taillights of his car until they disappeared at the end of the block. The litigation is ongoing. I will not pretend that the legal process has been simple or painless, because it has been neither. What I will tell you is that the rescission claim has merit, according to two separate attorneys, and that the PE group has already indicated through back channels that they would prefer a negotiated resolution to a federal lawsuit, which tells me something about how they view the strength of their own position. The Canton property is secure. The bonds are secure. I have a small apartment near downtown Akron where I have lived since October, and it suits me better than I expected. I sleep well, which surprised me. I thought I would lie awake, replaying the hospital room, the golden retriever card, my daughter's signature on a document she should not have signed. But I sleep. I think I sleep because I finally stopped carrying weight that was not mine to carry. And the body, it turns out, notices. I talk to Garrett every few weeks. We are careful with each other in a way we were not before. And careful feels more honest than the ease we had when money was standing in for everything we had not said. I have not spoken to Scott since that phone call in November. I have not spoken to Lydia at length since the Italian restaurant. She has sent me 2 texts. I have read them both. I am not ready to answer them yet, but I have not deleted them either. My brother Warren calls every Sunday from Flagstaff. We talk about baseball and our father, and the peculiar experience of being old enough to understand things you were too young to understand when they were happening to you. I do not know exactly what this story is. I am not sure it is a revenge story, though it has been called that. I am not sure it is a cautionary tale, though it probably functions as one. What I know is that I spent 43 years building something, and I almost let it be taken from me by people I loved because I had confused the act of giving with the act of being loved. And those two things are not the same. Learning that at 62 is late. It is also, as far as I can tell, not too late. The Cardinals are at the feeder this morning. There are 2 of them, a male and a female, and they take turns. There is something in that I keep meaning to think about more carefully. I have time now. That is the one thing nobody tried to take from me, and the one thing I find I value most.